which I shouldn't have done with my and all, and I thought that was great. But they sent me to the mountains, yeah, Asheville. You know where Black Mountain is?
Mm-hmm.
And suddenly I had to be in cold weather in the east, swim in ice cold water and climb mountains. You know, it was be good for me, and I couldn't stand it. But just occasionally, my mother and my aunts would come up to be in the mountains because Mississippi gets awful hot in the summer, and they wanted to go up. So I enjoyed being with them. But it was a really good experience in the long run. But just living in the mountains and knowing mountain people is something I've for, because some of my best friends in Chapel Hill, where I live now, are from the mountains, and I observed that them, which I think might be truer of mountain people, is that mountain people seem to me to mean what they say, and they stick to it. I don't. My brother married some mountains. I didn't like her too well, but she, let me see. She was very stubborn. What she said would remain that way. And I've noticed these people that I know in Chapel Hill, that if they declare their friendship to you, then this thing, he and his wife, great friends of mine, said nothing will change our friendship, nothing. And I've known them for years. And the others, if they get mad at you, that's it. I'm basing this on knowledge of very few people. I know someone at Chapel Hill, she was working very diligently for the church, the Episcopal church where I go, and she really did some rather rude treatment there when they replaced her with a professional. And so she said, well, I'm not going back to church. And then there's a certain thing about people who say in Mississippi, I'll never speak. Well, next weekend you'll find them together. It seems to me the mountain attitude is they never do speak. So that those are just superficial observations. But what would you say? Some of you may have contrasts in mind that distinguish mountain people from other people.
Oh, they're survivors. They're survivors.
In what way you mean?
Oh, they've had hard times from mining to logging to and all the unemployment that comes with that, the environmental that comes with that. They survive through
right. I'm reading a book now by Rob, who's a man I know and like very much. He's on a book tour with his book. He wrote a book called Gap Creek, and this is Move from Gap Creek is the name of it. And just his, I know he grew up in the mountains, but his understanding of the hard times people face, and just living on, and they have to. And so the two younger children, they just tell them they can't get in the wagon with us, they got to walk. So they walk behind the wagon. Stuff like that. I can't. I know we've had hard times in Mississippi, but sometimes it's a different story.
They've just finished reading Brave Enemies, Robert Morgan.
Oh, he's a good novelist. He's a good writer. And he wrote a book, what was that? Good work he wrote.
Lines of the West?
Yeah, the West. Read that if you can. It talks about the times of the Mexican War, and Thomas Jefferson and all that, and the of the country being toward the West, and the big figures were involved in that move, and it's just he's a good writer, good solid writer, and a good poet. Some of you write poetry. Good.
I'm just curious about I know you write and the other three writers, what kind of writing you all do, and how it impacts you to listen to Elizabeth read her story. I mean, are you short story writers?
Part of my digestion of this kind of thing that just for the life of me, can't finish more than a page of a story. So I'm in this sense of awe whenever
Didn't understand what he said.
He was saying, writers say just what he said. He said, that's the whole thing, I just get to the bottom of the first page of writing the story, and like what arrests in awe of listening to you read that marvelous story. And I'm providing all
yeah,
that.
so many of the all the novels I've been reading, especially recently, all the authors say it's not pulled from their life directly very much. It's very much made up, and you said that sometimes they'll come and sit next to you, and so it's like really interactive, almost with like your character sitting there talking to you about what's happening, whereas that's just not. I mean, I'm 21. I got a lot to know still, but all I can really put down on paper is what's happened.
Oh, to yourself. You know, Thomas Wolfe didn't do badly. He was like, some people feel their own story and the way it develops and everything is what they write. And so it works. It works sometimes. It really does. Don't give it up. So you interpret your own experience. It might have to be the best thing you could do. But I'm not, except for Landscapes of the Heart I wrote, I never was much interested in writing a book by myself. But that started out as a series of essays and articles and things like this that were written down, and it was a collection of pieces that there was a university press about to bring it out, and I was in New York, and my agent, who was trying to give the contract to the university press, had read the short pieces, some of them about recollections, and some of them about things that had happened or met and criticized in some way, and he said, "Look, you can give this to a university press. You're going to make a whole book of it." He called an editor he knew, and we sat down for lunch. I remember we were working hard, and they talked to me a while, and take these pieces and combine them into one narrative, and then it was brought out in New York. But I went home with it, and I thought, well, this is about a 2-week job, and I'll get through with it. 3 months later, I discarded some things, I rewrote some things, pieced together some. But I never set out to write a memoir, but it's turned into out of their encouragement, and I'm pleased to say that in print, and when did it come out? In the 90s sometime, and it attracted Sharon's interest. So there you go. Things evolve out of strange happenings, one thing to another. Just got to be alert to have you take the right turn at different times. Have you got a school magazine that you publish? You do?
We have a couple of them. New one right now. What's it called?
In your school magazine, you can
Well-
see, it always looks different when it's actually in print.
Uh-huh.
You can read it. Ooh, did I write that? Thank you all for coming. Yes, what?
Well, what is your writing day? I'll just ask.
I
What
don't
is your
write
writing
very
day?
much anymore. I never expected to get another book. This just happened because there were 2 editors in New York that wrote ahead in your new stories. And the last collection was called The Southern. It's in Modern Library. It came out, I think, about 10 years ago. Okay. I didn't mean to publish it, but I had written some new stories. And when they wanted stories, I showed them what I had, and they wanted them. So, I think they were only, anyway, 1 or 2 more stories, but if I didn't write them, it was all right. But if I did write 2 more stories, just almost accidentally, I just sat down and started writing one, and it turned out to be a longest one of the stories. It's the last one. It's called The Wedding Visitor. And I think it's a pretty good story. So anyway, I'm not ashamed of any stories that are in here, even after they got in print, but it hasn't been bound. It's not for sale. This is just a advanced reading. So anyway, and this is by a Mississippi artist, part of one of his paintings, and I love his work. He painted country scenes in Mississippi, and I bought 2 of them long years ago, and now there are whole books about him. His name is William Hollingsworth. Whole books about him, and I bought these paintings, which I have framed in my house, one for $5 and one for $20. That, of course, money went a lot, much longer way, but still, it's a rich thing.
Oh, it's so wonderful to have Southern artists because so many times they'll have artists paint northern mountains and put them on a southern
Oh, yeah.
book. That drives you crazy.
Well, I don't know.
Elizabeth, you were telling me the story of the artist, and when did he die? And tell them a little
He
bit about
committed
it.
suicide about 1940. But I don't know, his story is all told in this new book of his paintings, a big folio book that's come out. And I don't know, a book like that, they would tell you what his private troubles were that led him to suicide. But he had a family in Jackson, Mississippi was where he lived. But he went around painting everywhere, and beautiful, you know, that beautiful painting I have at the house. And he painted that in Holly Springs, Mississippi, which is a beautiful town, old town in Mississippi. So, not to talk too much about Mississippi, but when I've been living in, I don't know, over 20 years. Yes? Over
You're
20
in
years.
Chapel Hill, right?
Huh?
You live in Chapel Hill now?
Yeah, I live in Jackson.
I grew up right down the street in Durham from there.
Oh, yeah, Durham, yes, right there. We call it the triangle, Durham, Raleigh, and Chapel Hill. So it's all, that's the Piedmont. North Carolina's like 3 states. You've got, you know, Piedmont, the east, and then you got the mountains, as you know. I'm glad to be in the mountains for one day at least.
Well, and I think that sort of building on what you said about people meaning what they say in the mountains, and also the troubles that people have had, I think people in the mountains are more willing to resist being mistreated, and maybe because of the history of mistreatment that's been so long. But I was wondering if there are things about the difference between mountain literature, Appalachian literature, and Southern literature that come to mind.
Oh, that kind of thing. Well, let's see.
Also,
I was talking about Robert Morgan, as you know,
Mhm.
and Lee Smith was brought up in the Virginia mountains at Grundy, and a lot of her books are concerned with mountain people. Ranges. I hate to mention this, but one of the finest stories of William Faulkner is called Mountain Victory, and it's not very flattering. But,
yeah.
if any of you read that story, it's a powerful story. I think it's one of the best he ever wrote. And
I have read it. It's been a couple of years, but
oh yeah,
I like it.
it certainly the Baton people too. In the Civil War, a lot of them didn't go up with it. Didn't enjoy the wonderful Coal Mountain. This great mountain story. And that man was escaping with the war, and it isn't a very flattering picture of how they were trying to catch deserters, and this is it's not really merged with what I think of the South. The Deep South is what I think of, Alabama, Mississippi, and Louisiana, especially Louisiana, very, very different culture. And so you've got people who stand apart. They're not interested in standing with everybody else. They don't want to. So that, I don't, the solid South, not part of, is it, the mountain tradition?
Yeah.
Part of the solid South.
Elizabeth, I've always thought of literature written in the mountains as being kind of, especially around here, as being a subset of Southern literature that may be very different or an offshoot of. But what do you think?
I just think there's a real difference. There was some of the northern counties did not join in the Civil War.
So you would say that they aren't Southern anymore?
Oh, yeah, it's like a sonnet, but it's a different kind of sound.
Different.
And right around here, the divide was right along in here among other, I mean, Tennessee was Union, and parts of North Carolina, upper North Carolina were as well. And I think too, probably the smaller land holding was relevant, that they're more
They're not,
family farms
not
in the
plantations
mountains
like in the South.
than there are. I mean, there were quite a few in the south, I mean, in the upper south and in the Piedmont, our North Carolina Piedmont, but it does seem, there seem to me to be differences, although it's very hard to articulate.
I think there was also a history of poverty that far back too, which didn't help, I think. People wanted to stay within their circles, maybe.
Now, you have Charles Fraser here, does
Yeah, that's
Charles
true,
Fraser
that's
ever come and talk to you? He's a marvelous writer.
He is a marvelous writer, but Elizabeth, he was a student here, and he founded one of the literary magazines, which is called Cool Mountain.
Oh,
But then he got mad at us for some reason that I don't know the details of, and he'll never come back. So he's a good example of what you said.
Well, he met his wife here also. She was a student here too.
Okay, I didn't know that. And is he living in near Asheville now, or I know for
yeah, he was living near, not far from Raleigh for a good while. But I know him fairly well, and I like him a lot, and think he's a fine writer. That book surprised him as much as it did anybody. Thought maybe he'd sell about 5,000 copies, and my God, it shot straight up. It was top of the bestseller list for years and years, and then there was a movie. They made the movie in Romania somewhere.
yeah, right.
Somebody said, "Where are the rhododendrons?" So anyway, it's wonderful to see these writers come up out of the mountains. I know, if you read Look Homeward Angel, you'll see a great deal of personal writing. And, you've been to Asheville, of course, and seen my old Kentucky home. That figures in one of the stories I wrote here. Got which one? Oh, it's return trip about a man who comes back. He's going to Mississippi, but he stops in to see one of his old girlfriends, and she and her husband are living in the mountains, and they go to Asheville. By chance, happen to be in Asheville, and they go and look at my old Kentucky home. And I had to get that straight because so many people have been there. Sometimes you have to look things up and get them real right, because if it's a well-known place, you might make a terrible mistake. Just making things up.
The boarding house certainly affected, Thomas Wolfe. Is there something?
It did,
Is there
It's
something
still there,
from-
you can see it. It burned at one time, but they restored it.
Is there something from your childhood that affected?
Oh,
you
yeah, we
strongly?
went and saw that. I remember when I went through it a long time ago. But
Do you
I
have
don't
your
know-
own old Kentucky home, something similar? Do you have?
Probably.
What? Oh, you mean a place I've lived? I never lived in a boarding house. We have an old family plantation place, and the whole house is broken down. They were down there shooting that documentary, and I just wouldn't go in that house. Well, it's all caved in, and, it's really a ruin now, like bushes growing up around. But they sent one of the photographers around about it. He came running back terrified. Said, "I ran into a deer." No surprise in Chapel Hill to show up in my backyard. I'm sure you see a lot in the mountains. Do you see bear?
Oh, I got a story about a bear. I can tell it real quick. I was walking up this summer from my old apartment, walking up the driveway to my apartment. I see this thing just walking in the road, and I thought it was a dog or something. I got closer, it was a bear, and I ran, just ran the other way.
Where were you?
I was on Bodenheimer Drive up near the SRC at App Heights.
Wow,
Yeah, on campus there was a bear.
that is wild.
It was not fun.
How big was it?
It was, well, I thought it was a dog. It was only like this tall. Like it was a mama bear, I think.
Bear do.
I don't know. I didn't look back.
Retreat in Calgary called Banff. I don't know if you've ever heard of the place. And that was when we lived in Canada, and I was invited to fly out there and do a reading and so on. And it was a kind of retreat kind of place with very nice housing and auditoriums and all, but you had to walk by a path to go into town, and sometime I wanted to do that, so I would just walk down the path, go into town, and they told me it was the most dangerous thing I could do. that the bear were always turning up on that path, and so I didn't see one. But the bear would come and stroll all over town, which was be rather alarming. I don't know what you do if you encountered a bear. I guess I'd run too.
I think I think it was a bad decision in hindsight.
Yeah.
They can run faster than me, but.
I've seen them at times. Once my husband and I were on a bus going. He was English and he wanted to see as much of the country as he could, and he made me get on a bus in Memphis and ride through the mountains. And I was protesting all the way, but he liked to see all the countryside, and we saw a bear that trip. We were safely on the bus.
I have a question, Elizabeth. I'll try to make it quick, but
Yeah.
I recently heard that, in a reminiscence about Doris Betts, that she was asked by a writer, a young writer, what's your advice? And she said, try to quit.
If you
Or
can't
she
quit.
said, if you can't quit, and treat it like work, which I think is good advice, but the thing is, I'm asking sort of for you writers too, and you're all writers because you have to write essays, everything is writing. Is that the way you felt, like driven to write? Because I don't think every writer feels that way, that it's like that.
Oh, yeah. My mother used to read to me a whole lot, and I wasn't too well as a child, so opportunity if you weren't feeling well, and just to get your mother to read to you was the main thing I did. But I got fascinated with stories, and before I learned to write, even I would make them up in my head and tell them to myself. And I think he was talking about how do you move on in something that, you know, is not you. It's the story that fascinates me, what happened next,
Right.
and why, and who was involved in what happened next. And that's what pulls me on and on and on. And it's hard for me now because I don't write very much anymore. But if I get an idea like that, I'll plot down and stop just to say. Sometimes they just freeze up on you, though. Sometimes they will not move. In that case, I just leave them in the computer, although I used to put them in a drawer. Forget about it, and sometimes you look again, they'll wake up. They'll wake up, and then you want to know what happened next. But the whole idea of story is what moves me. I always did. About writing, and I started when I was too young to know any better. I think it was it Edith Wharton who said, I got into writing when I was too young to know any better. That was the reasoning anyway. I think fiction is a great outlet. You can invent things that somehow release something in yourself that maybe is troubling or a deep-seated feeling, and let it move. And you can move through the characters you invented, or you know, and somehow it clears out things. And also, reading good fiction is like that too. You encounter things in good fiction you read that maybe open up a vista you hadn't really cultivated, I thought. I think that idea he had in Cold Mountain about the separated lovers and the separated lovers by all kind of circumstance, keeping them apart, and then slowly coming back together. I thought that was what moved the book. But my hairdresser, who's a source of wisdom, I had him for years, he reads a lot. He said, well, even if he hadn't got killed, it wouldn't have lasted. I said, what do you mean? He said, I don't have enough in common. Things like that, but I don't. was so pleased when Charles Fraser made that great success. And his later books, I think. I read the last one. What was the name?
13, oh, no, there's a new one in there.
Yeah.
I haven't read that one.
Night something,
Yeah.
is set in the sixties in the mountains.
In the mountains.
In the mountains.
There you go. So, it's
Oh.
like being a writer in Mississippi, there's so much that's been done around you. You wonder if that was what really hit me when I realized, good Lord, here I am trying to be a writer. William Faulkner, Dora Welty. How in the world can you carry on? But as much as I admire both of those wonderful writers, they're very different from each other, and that's one reason to keep going, because no two talents are alike. And so I realized that I was cultivating my own individual thing, just as they had been. But
That story you just read,
What?
that story you just read was awesome.
What's what?
Awesome. You just wanted me to say it
I
twice.
did.
Yes, we did
This
like
girl
it.
here, Terry is a member of a writing group that I belong to in Sissy, in Chapel Hill. And we meet about once a month. But every one of these stories in here I've tried out on that group, and you're writing an interesting novel, I know. No more. I hadn't
Oh, yeah,
read
yeah,
her.
yeah.
Her husband is deeply engaged in a very fine novel that's laid in the mountains. And we've reheard sections of it in that group. And I'm looking forward to his completing that successfully, because I think it has great. But if you join a writing group and a writing place, if it's run right, it's sort of the same thing. You could hear and evaluate what other people are doing. And I think this is a big help to have a group. If you finish something and not quite secure about it, maybe it needs revision, a group can pipe up and help you a lot in these. Sometimes people in the group made good suggestions. For me, you remember. I bet I've read that story in the group.
I don't think so. I wasn't there. I didn't know
But I know another thing that fit. A friend of mine has a dog named Jasper that I'm
Yeah.
very proud of. I put Jasper in the story. A lot of my stories, there's one in here called Blackie, about a black dog. It's not about a black dog, but the dog figures in the story. And so I love to put animals in stories.
Well, and Jasper was so good for the ending of your
He ran
story.
away when she ran away, but he went in another direction.
Right. Well, Elizabeth, thank you so much. This has been wonderful.